Alright guys, welcome to Formula 1 News. George Russell may be under serious pressure going into 2025. Now the lead driver of course at Mercedes, but his teammate Andrea Kimi Antonelli, yes, a rookie for the year, but reportedly a rookie with so much testing time in Mercedes cars over the last few months, he actually may be better prepared than some of the other rookie drivers going into the sport next year who have already had Grand Prix experience, especially with the drama with Verstappen continuing behind the scenes. Russell is under serious pressure to deliver this year given the World Championship could well be on the line, and he's got to prove that his takeover in that role from Lewis Hamilton as team leader is going to be as successful as Toto Wolff wants it to be, especially with Verstappen maybe eyeing up a future team if Mercedes can deliver in 2026. Very much into your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I would greatly appreciate it. First of all, this is an image from the 2020 season, and I thought quite a fascinating image to look back on here because of all the drivers in this image, only 4, as Autosports put this out today, are in colour. Those 4 are the 4 drivers in their current seat, which they are in 4 or 5 years ago. Basically, the entire grid has either changed around which teams certain drivers are driving for, or there have been more substantial changes, such as drivers in, drivers out. But only 4 drivers are in the same seat they were in a few seasons ago, one of which, of course, world champion Max Verstappen, Charles Leclerc at Ferrari, Lando Norris at McLaren, long-term partnerships. Of course, Hamilton would have been there as well, apart from his departure to Ferrari. The 4th, however, is Lance Stroll. So this kind of classic, isn't it? You got Verstappen, Norris, Leclerc with their long-term partnerships with the top teams, but no, Stroll is here as well. Racing Point, Aston Martin, we know the story on the rest. Just quickly, because there's been more and more talk about this in Formula 1 lately, on the sustainable fueling. Right now, Formula 1 uses, I think, what they call E10 fuel, which is 10% renewable, sustainable fueling in the petrol that the cars basically use. In 2026, the fuel is meant to be turning fully sustainable. But of course, that's raising the question, well, if the fuel itself in the combustion engines can be made from sustainable sources, why do we need the electrical component at all? Many manufacturers are either coming to this realization or certainly feeling it may be true in the motorsport world, because batteries are very heavy and there are problems associated with the sustainability of those in the first place. And, there's lots of problems with having a 50% hybrid electrical power unit car, certainly in a Formula 1 context. That is what we have in 2026. The cars are going to be marginally lighter, but they're still going to be massive and still very heavy. If we took the current concept, went back to obviously people are going to say V10, but something of that era, 20 or so, let's say 15, 20 years ago, before the hybrid technology came anywhere near Formula 1. And we've seen this in other motorsports in recent months. Motorsports moving away from hybrids because their manufacturers believe the future is actually not with electric, the future is with combustion, but with sustainable fuels. And that maybe is a realization I think that F1 will have soon. And, well, maybe the manufacturers have to some degree already had, but they're locked in for 2026. The next changes will happen further down the line, but there's been more talk about it lately. And I'm sure there are teams that are interested in these type of ideas. Let's talk quickly about Hamilton to Ferrari. Of course, a big deal, especially with regard to George Russell, we're going to discuss in a second. Reportedly, he will be partnered with Riccardo Adami, of course, former race engineer to Sebastian Vettel, more recently to Carlos Sainz at the team. That was rumoured today, that on his side of the Ferrari garage will be this man, well actually not this man, but the man we'll see here in a second, this man on the right hand side, that is Riccardo Adami, of course, who worked with Sainz, and before that worked with Sebastian Vettel as well. These guys, of course, great rivals, once upon a time, good friends on the present day. There was a rumour several months ago that Hamilton had sent a text to Seb to say, hey, is Adami any good? Like, will he work well for me? And Vettel gave him a, basically a round of ringing approval, I guess you should say, that it'll be a good partner to Lewis. At the end of the day, often these relationships between drivers and race engineers comes down to personality. Do they match or not, right? Is it going to work? I think it is a question for Ferrari, especially when we know that their radio messages over the years and that kind of, let's say, communication between the pit wall and the drivers is not always the best and has drawn criticism. So I think that is a question about Hamilton's time at Ferrari, because Peter Bono, he's not going with Hamilton. He will maybe stay as Antonelli's engineer. Maybe he will move into a different role off the pit wall at Mercedes. But whatever happens, Hamilton will get a new engineer, and it's going to be, we think, Riccardo Adami at obviously Ferrari. And whether that relationship really works, who knows? It is a point of contention for sure, but there's many other questions as well within that team at the moment. Let's talk about Mercedes, though. They're obviously optimistic for 2026. I think there is a feeling from myself and others that Mercedes may be one of the first teams in 2025 to switch to the 2026 focus, because they are confident in their power unit. Toto Wolff says, oh, well, yeah, we're hitting our targets, but we've got more targets to hit. We're not sure where we are with respect to the other teams, but fundamentally, Mercedes are pretty convinced they've got a good engine, and most of the other teams seem to believe that as well, going into another iteration of the hybrid era. We know what happened the first time around back in 2014. This is one of the reasons why Verstappen has reportedly had conversations with Mercedes and Toto Wolff. Even Jos Verstappen reportedly came to a verbal agreement with Toto that Max would join Mercedes if a certain number of things happened. Mainly depends on what happens at Red Bull. Are there more push factors from the development of their car? Whatever. But it is a big talking point. And for Mercedes, they really want to get back on top in 26. I'm sure they believe they can maybe win races again in 2025. The possibility of winning the championship this year against Max, against McLaren, against Ferrari still seems out of reach of Mercedes as it stands. That could be more bad news for Russell, but obviously in 2026, that you would think on paper is their chance to win the championship again, as of course famous they did back in 2014 and 2015 and 2016, and I don't need to say the rest. So a couple of updates here on Mercedes' car, what they're developing on for the W16, but as we've said before, the rumour has it that the W16 is going to be more of an evolution of the W15, as in less revolutionary than some of the other teams are producing for the 2025 season. Just a couple of things. So they're working on improving the stiffness of the chassis for the new car, also improving the suspension mounts. They'll reposition them for improved performance. So look, the car will be different, of course, but it's not like they're making massively wholesale changes. They're working a lot on the front suspension. The mounts are going to be repositioned. The car's going to be more stable in the curved entrance of the corners, especially at the rear, where the oversteer usually was found. And there was a feeling that because of the way that especially Hamilton liked to drive the car, the instability of the rear led to rear tyre temperatures skyrocketing a lot of the time. That obviously decreased the grip at the rear, and they're going to have greater stability. So lots of talk about Mercedes on the front suspension, changing a few things around, but they're not, there's not massive conversations around, wow, Mercedes are changing 99% of their car like Ferrari are talking about and all this, because the Mercedes fundamentally, on weekends where it worked, and sometimes it did really work, it was unbelievably good. Las Vegas, Spa, to some degree Silverstone, but definitely those two races that I mentioned, they were unbelievably quick. A lot of that came down to the way they were treating the tyres, but obviously they were doing something right. And I guess for Mercedes, it comes down to the point of today, we're on January the 4th, they can, if they want to, completely, not work on the W16 at all anymore and start full work on the W17. Of course, their 2026 car, should they choose to do so. My feeling is they will do that more swiftly than other teams will, and they will be happy to say, all right, 2025, it's going to be a learning year for Antonelli. It's going to be a year where we're going to try and win some races, but I don't think Mercedes have in their minds that the championships are particularly attainable for this upcoming season, based on what we saw last year. Race wins, sure, if they can make that more consistent, I mean, maybe they can be in the conversation. But the reality was this year, they were so inconsistent, they were just absolutely in no man's land by the end of the season. And that's why Russell could be under some pressure, because if Mercedes are very much so focusing on 2026, as it seems they may well be, and they've got a great engine cooking up, And we know that Toto Wolff has been very open that if Max Verstappen was to be available, and so has Jos Verstappen on this story, that he would find a seat for him at Mercedes. Whether Russell has convinced Mercedes he is the appropriate lead driver for the team is still a question. Russell is fast, certainly in qualifying, but he has had some crashes, he has made some mistakes at crucial moments, and maybe that's expected. And I rate Russell actually really quite highly, but I don't think he's as good as Max Verstappen is, and neither does anyone, really, within reason. So the question is, if Antonelli does a killer job at Mercedes, and Russell is good, but nothing spectacular for the upcoming season with respect to Antonelli, what does that mean if Mercedes are looking very promising for 2026 and maybe Red Bull aren't and Verstappen wants to switch? At that point, it's difficult to see Antonelli getting dropped, especially if he is looking very solid going into the season. So reportedly he has completed 9,000 kilometers of testing with previous cars with Mercedes. So various cars, I think we saw him testing a W13. Of course, he can now test the W14 as well as of the start of this year, the car from a couple of years ago. Also, I think old Mercedes from 2021 and stuff, he was driving as well. So Antonelli has done loads of testing in these Mercedes cars. Obviously, a lot of this might have been before he got the official drive confirmation because they wanted to know that he was good enough to do it. And look, the only time that he's really taken to the track here in F1 has been in Monza, where he was purple and then put it in the wall in Sector 3. But I think Antonelli's got a good head on his shoulders, and there's no doubt in my mind, nor Mercedes' mind, that he's got the pace. Now, Mercedes have also said we want him to build into the sport. He's not going to come out here and stick it on pole in Bahrain, or in Melbourne, of course it is, the first race of the upcoming season. That's not the plan for Mercedes, and I'm sure that Antonelli knows that as well. He will make mistakes, he will have some crashes, it is what it is, but he's actually got a lot of experience. I mean, you compare these numbers, if what AMUS is saying is true, and usually it is true coming from this very reliable source. Behrman, Colapinto, Lawson, those guys, they've done multiple Grand Prix in Formula 1. I don't know if they've done this many laps in Formula 1 cars. Sure, a Grand Prix is a different story to just driving F1 cars around a track for testing related purposes, but still, 30 races worth of distance is pretty substantial, and it's something for Russell to think about. Russell will not be concerned. He's a very self-confident guy about his ability to beat Antonelli and beat Antonelli convincingly. But I would expect that on some weekends, Antonelli is going to be mega impressive. On some weekends, he won't be. That's how rookies tend to go. But if Antonelli is as quick as Mercedes seem to think he is, he will have some weekends which put Russell under pressure. Especially if Verstappen is not so happy as he wasn't this season with the Red Bull situation, it puts Russell under some pressure. I wouldn't say Russell's under pressure if Verstappen isn't available. If there was any other driver in the conversation, I think Mercedes are quite happy with George. But fundamentally, Lewis has delivered so many championships to Mercedes that Mercedes need to be confident going into 2026 they have a driver capable of doing so. Russell, of course, would probably tell you, look, put me in that McLaren this year and I'd have won the championship. And do I think the Russell would have done a better job than Lando this season? I actually do think so, but it's still probably not enough to win the title. I just don't think the Russell's race pace is consistently good enough to make that argument. So I think we're going to have a very telling season for Russell, for Mercedes especially, and there's lots of factors here at play, especially because the Russell-Verstappen feud, if you want to call it that, has not necessarily gone away. Max actually did say, though, that after Abu Dhabi, they briefly spoke after the race and said, look, all right, we're going to start again next year. It is what it is. Because obviously we know that it was massive drama between the pair of them at the Qatar Grand Prix after the penalty that Verstappen got because Russell was in the steward's room saying what he said. Verstappen made his comments, Russell made his comments back, and all the drama was happening, of course, at the time to such an extent that the F1 drivers turned up to their Abu Dhabi dinner that the drivers do at the end of the season, and they had a seat ready for George next to Max that he was not willing to take. But apparently after the weekends, they, to some degree, cleared the air. But it only takes one small incident on track in 2025 for that to be a very different story. And would, hypothetically, if Mercedes are looking very good in 2026, Max take some degree of pleasure in taking Russell's drive in either 26 or 27? I wouldn't be surprised if he would. But at the end of the day, it does come down to how good the cars actually are. Thought this was interesting here from Gary Anderson over at the race, not the darts player, of course, but he put together his early season predictions on where the teams are going to play out. Now, these are really just predictions, and I wouldn't say that you can take anyone's predictions in Formula 1. Even a very respected figure of the F1 world, former, designer, of course, Gary Anderson's take on this, you still got to take it with a grain of salt, absolutely. But his perspective is based on the trajectory of the teams and just his general feeling that McLaren will maintain their spot as the fastest car at the start of the season. So this is crucially an early season prediction. For example, Ferrari this year, they started not amazingly well, then they got faster at a point, then of course they had their ups and downs. But this is intending to be a prediction for what's going to happen over the first 5 Grand Prix of the season. Anderson reckons McLaren are going to have the fastest car. He does not have much faith in Ferrari. He thinks actually they're going to be 4th best at the start of the new season. He's got Red Bull in 2nd best, and he's got Mercedes in 3rd. So obviously it's just a prediction. Like, nobody really knows what's going to happen here, but I did think it was kind of interesting. So he's got Aston Martin in 7th, he's got Alpine in 5th, which is interesting because, to be fair, aerodynamically, they did manage to produce a good car at the end of last season. It's just it was absolutely horrid at the start of the year. Haas he's got down in 9th, Racing Bulls down in 8th, Williams he's actually got up in 6th, which to me is surprising, maybe. I mean, obviously his reasoning is as follows, but I would call it surprising just because Williams, at least publicly, all they ever talk about, I mean, the team always does this, to be fair, but oftentimes what they usually say is, oh, we're just focusing on next year. It's next year TM Williams. And to be fair, they produced a solid car last year, given they had a disastrous winter dealing with all their Excel stuff behind the scenes. They had to transition over from doing everything and tracking everything with an Excel sheet over to doing it the proper way, and that messed up all of their development over last winter. So I guess the theory might be that with a better winter, they can do a better job for the new season. And I'd like Williams to have a good car. I'm just not convinced they're going to be 6th, personally, just because all they say is that, well, we're only just really focusing on 2026. That's the plan for Sainz and Albon and whatever. But maybe this considers to some degree the fact that they're going to have a good driver pairing for feedback and stuff as well. And then Sauber presumably 10th. But yeah, that's his early season prediction. Whether he's right, I mean, who knows? One thing, though, that is true is that the last 2 times a former champion joined Ferrari, a Mercedes driver won the driver's title. On both occasions, of course, that was Lewis Hamilton. So I find this stat kind of funny. It's a stupid statistic, really. It doesn't mean anything. But it was worthy of comment that the last couple of times, so with Raikkonen rejoining Ferrari in 2014, Hamilton, of course, won the drivers that year for Mercedes. And then most recently with Sebastian Vettel, the same thing happened again. So, both times this occurred, it was Hamilton at Mercedes. But technically it was, so either you argue, oh, well, Hamilton's joining Ferrari now, so that means Hamilton's going to win it again. But also the stat could say, well, no, a Mercedes driver won it both times, so that means a Mercedes driver is going to win it again. Doubtful either way, but yeah, a big season, of course, for all involved, especially because it should be on paper just so competitive at the top of the field. But very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.